Welcome to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes, the podcast with hot takes on food media.
We interview popular chefs and food personalities, sample all kinds of food media, and try cooking challenges in our own kitchens.
Let's dig in. Hey, it's Justine.
And it's me, Meg. Welcome to another episode of Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes. Today we have a very special episode for you. We are interviewing Anna Hezel. Anna Hezel is a senior editor at Epicurious and the author of Lasagna and Tin-to-Table. Anna's writing has appeared in publications like The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Lucky Peach, GQ, Rolling Stone, Food 52, Bon Appetit, and many more. Anna is here with us today to talk about all things food, but especially tinned fish. Anna's new cookbook, Tin-to-Table, fancy snacky recipes for tin-thusiasts and A-fish-ionados, hits bookstores this week. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you again for joining us. So I just have to start out, why tinned fish? Were you always a fan, or are you a new convert?
I think I first got really sold on the idea of tinned fish when I visited Portugal a few years ago, because it was the first time since childhood, like eating cans of tuna as a kid. It was the first time that I saw tinned fish as like a really fancy treat that you got to like go to a wine bar, get a really nice bottle of wine, order some sardines, and they come with like some like warm, freshly baked, crusty bread. And that sort of made me realize that this is a really special artisan item that's sort of like really carefully, thoughtfully made, and that a lot of culinary tradition and experience goes into making it.
Is that why in your book you talk about how canned fish has gone from a convenience food to a luxury item and a lifestyle?
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and our grocery store was stocked with like canned tuna, canned salmon, chopped clams. They were like all really like convenience items. They were very inexpensive. But now, like in my 30s living in New York, there are all these grocery stores and like even restaurants that have little markets sort of built into the front that are selling really beautiful, carefully made tins that are imported from France or Spain or Portugal that just are like such beautiful little works of art, where like the mussels or clams or sardines are like beautifully hand packed and kind of like perfectly tiled into the tin. And the tin is filled with like really beautiful extra virgin olive oil. And it just seems like the world of tinned fish is like, especially just in the US, like what we're sort of like open to and like what you can find at the average corner grocery store. It's just like rapidly changing.
You've sort of already talked about this, and I think I might have an idea as to your answer, but why do you think of all the convenience foods, it was tinned fish that has sort of been elevated to this luxury item and not, for example, canned meats or some other convenience item like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like canned fish has such a long history of being, I mean, it's sort of ironic because it's like a shelf-stable item that can last for years and years in your pantry, but it's actually a very fresh presentation of seafood. Often, the sardines will be caught and then they will actually like be processed and put in tins within hours of being caught. So you kind of get the seafood in a more fresh presentation than you even like could get fresh sardines. Like living in New York, at my Whole Foods, those sardines have been off the boat for days and days by the time they hit the grocery store. So getting them in a can is like weirdly kind of a way to taste them at their freshest, most like, just like minerally, oceany kind of, yeah.
And it's a beautiful whole food and not like a processed meat.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like a lot of the processing is really minimal. Anchovies are like one where the process is a little longer, but it's just salt. Like it's just that these
Mm.
little fish are tossed in these big barrels with tons and tons of salt, and that cures them over the course of a few months. And then they're put in tins with olive oil. But in terms of processing, like that's not that crazy. It's just like adding salt to like very, very fresh, beautiful little fish.
I think that's so interesting because it feels like maybe for a home cook today, the processed foods may even seem less scary than a whole tinned fish item. So what would your advice be to have like a good place to start there? Do you have like a good entry level recipe for someone who's afraid?
Definitely. I mean, I always like this is sort of almost like a meme among people who love tin fish, just like telling people to get a baguette and some good butter and like open a can of mackerel or sardines or whatever. Um, it's like, yeah, I'm always repeating myself to just do that because something about like the crusty bread and like salty butter kind of cuts through the minerally oceany aspect of tin fish, and I think it like sort of puts it in a textural zone that people are really comfortable with, that like bread and butter, it kind of makes the texture even more luxurious for the fish. But also, I mean, you both know your way around Reddit, and I am part of the R canned sardines subreddit, which is
Wow.
like such a fun, supportive place to like get into tin fish. I feel like every day someone posts that they're kind of like dipping their toes in the water, no pun intended, and that they're like, trying to get started out with a few tins or like a few preparations. And it's just like such a supportive environment of just people recommending like tricks and like, oh, have it with hot sauce and saltines,
Mm.
or try this one in the grocery store, just like as an entry level tin. It's really nice. It's like a nice place to visit if you're thinking about trying tin fish, but you're not sure.
There is truly a subreddit for everyone.
I was gonna say the
There
same
really
thing.
is.
Related question. Is there any hope for those people who describe fish as too fishy? Do you think a tinned fish exists for those folks?
Definitely. There are so many, even like outside of the category of fish, there are so many tinned seafood that really have like totally different flavor profiles. I'm always trying to get people more into tinned mussels,
Mm.
which
Mm.
like I know like there's something textural that like freaks people out a little bit. Even like before I had tinned mussels, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. But they have just like a really fresh minerally flavor. A lot of the tin mussels that come from Spain are packed in an escabeche sauce, which is like really vinegary and just like really good olive oil, really good vinegar, a lot of paprika and clove and bay leaf and like
Mm.
other kind of
Mm.
savory worm spices. And it's a cool way to just like open something fancy, and it's awesome as a snack or like as a party food. But also like it just has such a different flavor profile than sardines or mackerel or tuna. It's just like the sauce is like a little sweet, a little tart, a little spicy.
Mm-hmm.
Love mussels.
I noticed that Patagonia Provisions smoked mussels was really going viral recently online. So it seems like it's the time for mussels. It's the year of mussels.
I hope so. They're also like really amazing environmentally because they're one of the types of seafood that you can farm with like sort of a net positive effect on the surrounding ecosystem, like
Oh,
because they clean the water and they like filter the water that they're being farmed in. So they're a very sustainable option for tin seafood.
oh, I didn't know that.
Mm. Well, you've mentioned clams, mackerel, sardines. mussels, and there's so many more. Do you, this may be like picking your favorite child, do you have a favorite?
I have such a weakness for sardines. I just think that I mean, there's such a range of like what they can taste like, but I just love like there's something about the scale of them that's really great. I think like a really good tin of sardines just has like this like really, really buttery, tender texture that's a little bit silkier than mackerel or tuna or other kind of like heartier, drier fishes. So I just find sardines so luxurious. They're so good. It's funny that like sardines are one of the labels that like the USDA allows something like 6 or 7 species of fish to be labeled as sardines.
Hmm.
Like there's no it's crazy. Like there's no like just sardine species. It's actually
Interesting.
many species.
Oh, wow. I love hearing you describe fish. It's so beautiful. You're obviously a food writer. And I love your descriptions in the book as well. I feel like people should pick up the book and they'll be instantly transported to eating a tin of fish and want to eat some immediately. And you also mention in the book that shelf stable foods like canned fish saw a resurgence during the early days of the pandemic. So, do you think that tin seafood would be enjoying this popularity at this moment or not for if not for the pandemic, or do you think it was bound to come around again at some time?
I definitely think that it would be like on the up and up, whether or not, our lives had all changed in 2020.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I actually like over the course of writing this book, I think I started the proposal in 2020 and wrote the book over the course of 2021.
Mm.
And I wound up talking to a lot of companies who were had plans to launch brands anyways before the pandemic, sort of like capitalizing on this like trend or this like upswing. But then COVID came around and like it somehow became even more popular and people were, I think, ordering a lot more groceries online and like ordering a lot
Mhm.
more ingredients online,
Hmm.
which also I think helped a lot of companies. Like Fishwife, for instance,
Mhm.
launched, I think they launched in like fall of 2021, maybe. And I mean, their business started out like totally direct to consumer. People were buying packs online. And like that's how a lot of us kind of shop now, or at least shop for some of our groceries and some of our pantry items. So yeah, I think those two things coming together like really let this trend take off.
You also have a great guide in the book about where folks can find canned fish online to order directly to their home. Fishwife and Fly by Jing has been one of my favorite food collaborations ever in the last couple of years. Very tasty stuff.
It's really good. Yeah, I there have been so many just like busy, exhausted days where I just eat that for lunch, like dumped over some rice or
Hmm.
like with some chopped vegetables, whatever. It's great.
What was it like writing a cookbook in the pandemic? I know we got like a lot of cookbooks during and post or in the past year of pandemic. What was it like?
I mean, it was interesting because I was like working completely from home. So I was cooking so many meals per week. So it was kind of
Hmm.
like worked out for recipe development because like I had to be cooking constantly anyways. Um, but the hard thing was that a lot of the recipes in my book are like sort of like are were designed with entertaining and parties in mind. And that was the thing that I really missed, like just having big
Hmm.
parties to like test recipes and have people over and see what they thought.
Yeah.
Speaking of parties, all types of boards are very popular right now. Cheese boards, charcuterie boards, chocolate boards.
So many.
What's that?
I had so many boards.
So many boards. So what is on your perfect fish board?
Ooh.
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. I have like, okay, so there's a chapter in the book that's sort of designed for when you're eating tin seafood right out of the can. So it's like little accompaniments and garnishes and like little sides to go with it. So there's a really cool recipe for like a sort of lemon confit that just turns into like almost like a marmalade texture, but
Mm.
it's like made in olive oil. And so like a little bit of that, a little bit of pickled shallots, really awesome. Some of those like Spanish, like long, skinny pickled peppers called guindillas or
Mm.
piparas. Those I can't get enough of. Like I could eat a jar of those a day. So I love having like a little like something a little pickly, something a little spicy, something like maybe a little sweet even on the array, and like lots of crunchy vegetables. I love to
Mm.
eat my tin fish with like sliced fennel, cucumber, like any little crunchy things to go along with it to bring the like really fresh element.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure. Tinted Table has a lot of recipes for like simple accompaniments, snacks, dips, salads, sandwich sauces. But which wines or cocktails do you think pair best if we want to get our drink on with our tinned seafood?
Totally. Well, like I think I there are a couple spots where I call out really good pairings. Like there's a Caesar popcorn in the book that's basically it's really surprisingly simple. You like make a quick like anchovy garlic butter and sprinkle that over popcorn with some, I think, like a little bit of cheese, a little bit of parsley. And that's awesome with like a bitter, like a Negroni type
Mm.
thing, just to have like the bittersweet to contrast with the really, really salty, savory popcorn. I'm also a really big fan of Spanish vermouths. There's like a lot of bars in Spain have a sort of like their house vermouth, which is like usually like sort of like spiced with orange peel and gentian root and like a bunch of other little herbs and spices. So it's like sort of a complex, but like generally kind of low alcohol because it's a
Mm.
fortified wine. Just like really refreshing thing. They serve it usually on ice with a wedge of orange and a green olive. And it's so refreshing and like just the right amount of sweet and like sort of citrusy. If you mix it with seltzer, it kind of just tastes like a really good Coca-Cola.
Mm.
And
Oh,
so like Spanish vermouths, I think just go amazingly with tinned fish.
You're really
man.
speaking my language now.
I was going to say, Meg, are you getting any ideas?
I
Meg is
know.
our resident mixologist.
Yes, I create cocktail recipes freelance. So yeah, keep the
Oh,
ideas
cool.
coming.
Cool. Okay.
I want to bring us back to anchovies for a second. You mentioned the anchovies on the Caesar popcorn, and I'm assuming as a New Yorker, you might have strong pizza opinions. So, anchovies on pizza, yay or nay?
Oh, totally. I'm totally supportive of that. Love it.
Have you ever met a tin fish you didn't like?
Okay, yes. Off the top of my head, immediately, yes. A couple years ago, I just like picked a bunch of tins from my pantry and like went over to the park and had a little picnic with some friends. And one of the ones that we opened was like a tinned sea urchin roe, like just
Mm.
like uni basically in a can. And there are a few Spanish brands that do this. And I was just really curious about what that would taste like from a
Mm.
can. And it wasn't my favorite. Like the texture, just, like the kind of creamy, smooth quality that I associate with urchin when you have it fresh, like at a sushi restaurant. It just like in the tin form, it was like grainy and like
Mm.
I don't know, it just was like a texture and a taste that I am not used to, and I haven't bought another can since then, but maybe I
Yeah.
should be more open minded.
I feel like uni is a tough sell. I love sushi, but you gotta get the perfect uni, I think. It's one of those ones where it's either really good or maybe not the best, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like like when it's really, really fresh, love it. But yeah.
So you've transported me back to Japan. I lived in Japan for a year and I love tuna salad. I love convenience store tuna salad sandwiches in Japan. And you have a recipe in your book for konbi or convenience store tuna salad sandwich. And I was just wondering, aside from this recipe, for people like me who love tuna salad and have been eating it my whole life, how can I level up my tuna salad?
Yeah, the konbi recipe in the book is from this restaurant bakery that actually recently closed in LA called
Mm.
Konbi. And they were really famous for these beautiful milk bread sandwiches that they made. And I mean, their trick, which is so genius, like I'm mad that I didn't think of it, is just to buy like they would just buy huge cans of water packed tuna, drain them, and then marinate the tuna overnight with soy sauce and mirin,
Oh.
Mm.
which I thought was so like such a genius way to totally infuse the flavor throughout like every bite, every flake of tuna.
Hmm.
But using like a pretty convenient, inexpensive can. So I thought that that was really brilliant. And then they like strain it off and mix it with mayo and celery, like you know, like you might be used to. But I
Hmm.
also just like to, if I'm making like a tuna melt or a tuna sandwich, whatever exciting pickles I have in the fridge,
Mm.
totally great to like chop up and throw in there. I really like to put pickled shallots in my
Mm.
tuna sandwich because it's like a nice way of adding a little bit of tartness, like a little acidity without making the whole salad like wetter.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to add more liquid. And yeah, and like any fresh herbs, like, if you're trying to use up the last little bit of tarragon that some recipe called for, or parsley or dill, all of those awesome in a tuna salad.
For sure. So, tuna salad, tuna noodle casserole, seafood mousse. It's like 70s dinner parties making its comeback. So, what other vintage foods do you think will have newfound popularity?
Oh, wow. I mean, I do think like our generation is starting to, I mean, I say our generation, but I guess I mean like people my age in their 30s are starting to have like a little bit more appreciation for the foods that they thought were gross as kids. So I feel like I've been seeing a lot of like sloppy Joe recipes
Mm.
around, like tuna noodle casseroles and like some of those other casseroles.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people are getting back into. I the other night I made have you ever had the like saltine toffee where you like lay saltines out on a sheet pan and then like cook butter and brown sugar and pour it over and it like hardens into toffee?
I've had it, I think, once before.
That's one that like I made as a kid that's like I just recently revisited it and was like, wow, this is so good. Why am I not making this all the time? But I think,
Personally, I
yeah.
think that cottage cheese is going to make a comeback.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Cottage cheese, really good when it's good.
That's true. I think that people are also discovering savory cottage cheese, which maybe we hadn't thought
Oh.
of as kids.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's that like kind of fancy brand called Culture, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
It's really good.
I'll have to keep my eye out for that. So, what would you say is the most surprising tinned fish you've had? Something unexpected.
Huh. Oh, the other night I had a tinned mackerel from a brand called Curiosa, which is like a slightly newer brand. I think they started a couple of years ago. And the mackerel was packed in like curry, like a curry flavored oil.
Ooh.
Mm.
And it was unexpected to me because I have not, I think it was like the first curry flavored tin that I've had or opened. And it was so good, like really spicy and just like really full of savory, warm spice. Yeah, it was awesome.
So you mentioned things like your pickled shallots. What are some other must-have pantry items that people should have to serve alongside the tin fish?
I love like a pickled pepper, like I said, guindillas or piparas, or really like any other kind of pickled pepper can be awesome with seafood. Olives, love a good like
Mm.
juicy Spanish olive with tin fish. Chili oil, we talked about the Fly by Jing fishwife collaboration.
Hmm.
Totally a testament to how great chili oil and seafood can be together. Yeah, and like I love like a vinegary, having a vinegary hot sauce. I'm from Buffalo, so like Frank's Red Hot all the way.
Oh.
But having just like a kind of classic vinegary hot sauce, especially for something like smoked oysters or like something
Oh.
that like could use like a little top note of acidity. Really nice to have around.
Mm-hmm. Always that salt, fat, acid, heat.
Yeah.
Exactly, as Samin taught us. Gotta have all
Yes.
those elements.
So we've already talked about this a little bit, but Tin to Table is not your first cookbook. Can you tell us a little bit about Lasagna, a baked pasta cookbook?
Yeah, Lasagna was a cookbook that came out in 2019, and I wrote it with my fellow editors at Taste, where I was an editor at the time. And it's really just like an appreciation of Italian American, like red sauce, baked pastas, like nostalgic, homey, like Olive Garden vibes, but at home, I would say.
Hmm.
Just kind of like celebrating that at home.
It's so interesting. First, book on lasagna, then tin fish. How do you decide what to make a cookbook on?
Well, I would definitely have wanted to write a cookbook about tin fish for years. Like before I worked on a book about lasagna, that was always like really my dream.
Hmm.
But I think both of them, like for me as an editor, I think like it's so fun to just obsess over one topic for a little while and like look
Mm.
at it from many angles because like canned fish is part of so many cuisines around the world, and there are so many creative things that chefs now are doing with canned fish that there are just like so many ways to look at it. And I think lasagna, that's sort of true of also, but it also just was like a fun category of entertaining and cooking to kind of like obsess over for a year. And they're both rectangular objects, book shaped objects, really surface level.
It doesn't pigeonhole you as a writer, but now you can only do rectangular foods.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
your
mean, what else would maybe like cereal
icebox
box?
cakes.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
A cereal cookbook would be fascinating.
That'd be great.
I did try when I was at Taste, I tried to convince everyone that we should write a loaf pan cookbook just because
Ooh.
like there's like it's convenient if you have like a tiny apartment or if you're cooking in a dorm room, but there's
Hmm.
yeah, like there are icebox cakes, loaf cakes, even lasagna, like a mini lasagna I've made in a
Yeah.
loaf pan. But yeah, I'm really thinking inside the box here.
Uh, I love the puns in Tin to Table. I feel like loafs would be rife with pun opportunities as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, I should pitch the book as like a puns first. I should think through the puns first and then write the proposal.
Yes.
I agree.
Sold.
Do you have a favorite recipe from Tin to Table or a recipe that you would say to someone like, if you try one recipe, try this one?
I would have a really hard time picking a favorite, but there is one that like multiple people who tested recipes have cooked it and just said like, wow, I want to cook this every week.
Mm.
And it's this recipe that I think it's called like spaghetti with fancy hams and fancy clams. And it's like a spaghetti with like a garlicky cockle sauce. It's basically
Mm.
like a variation on like a white clam sauce,
Mm.
but it uses cockles in like a really garlicky white wine sauce. And then you like crisp up some prosciutto or like Serrano ham in a skillet and then garnish it with this like crispy, shattery ham. So it has the like really like fresh, briny cockles, the garlic, and then this like really like crisp, delicate ham on top. And that
Ooh.
it's really good. And people who have cooked it have said that they liked it.
And it's fancy, fancy.
Yes, double fancy. Too fancy, too furious.
Did you have any sort of major learnings from your first cookbook, creating that you applied to making this cookbook?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot. I think like one of the main things, like working on a lasagna cookbook, I worked with a recipe developer named Grace Parisi. So she was developing a lot of the recipes. I was testing a lot of them or like trying out like, concepts, like making lasagnas to see if they would like work and if we wanted to incorporate them in the book. So thankfully I didn't have to bake like 100 lasagnas over the course of that book. But I think working on that book made me realize that if you're recipe testing, it's really easy to get totally sick of the type of food you're writing about really quickly.
Mm.
So I think like the main thing was being really, really strategic about spreading out the recipe development over the course of like, between signing on to write the book and handing in the draft and like really distributing like what types like sandwiches spread out over the course of several months so that I don't get sick of tuna sandwiches.
Mhm.
And just like yeah, being like mindful of like what I would be in the mood to cook because you don't want to be trying to develop a recipe for something that you're like totally sick of because then you're
Mhm.
just going to be like I'm done testing. I'll just write it this way. So
Yeah.
like yeah, I think just like trying to capitalize on what I was in the mood to cook and eat and be excited about.
Was there a big range in the number of times you tested a recipe? Was there be one recipe that right away it just needed minor tweaks and another one that I don't know how many times do you test it? Dozens?
Not dozens, thankfully.
That's
You
probably the time
can.
to just get rid of that recipe.
Yeah. I mean, a few times. Like, I think like there was a lot of pressure to make the pastas in the book good because I think I think people will like really gravitate towards making the pastas. And also a sardine pasta, like you don't really need a recipe to make. So if I'm gonna write a recipe, I want it to be really good.
Hmm.
So I think I just played with so many different variations on sardine pasta. There's like a sardine and fennel pasta in the book. But I did like a million different spin-offs on that. One that like surprisingly worked right away was like there's this one night when I didn't have groceries and didn't feel like going to get groceries and like my husband wasn't home, so I was just cooking for me. And I had one potato, and so I made like a fish and chips with just
Mm.
like opening a can of sardines.
Mhm.
I made like a really quick batter with just like flour and seltzer and just like fried them and then like fried the potatoes to make little French fries.
Wow.
And it was zany, but like it just kind of worked on the first try. And I was like, I think I have to put this in the book. It's pretty good.
The fish and chips for one, is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I feel like you would survive on a cooking competition show very well. Here are your
Thank
basket
you.
items.
Yeah, that experience made me think I would, but I would buckle under the pressure so fast. I don't think I would actually do well on a cooking show.
Now, Tin to Table just hit bookshelves, but are you already brainstorming for your next cookbook?
That cereal cookbook.
Uh,
Yeah, something rectangular. Yeah, I think it's like a little bit like having a baby where you need a few months to like forget how hard it was, and then you're like, oh, why don't I do this again? But I also have another single subject book I have a dream of writing is about potato chips
Ooh.
because I think there's so many people across the country are so obsessed with their regional hyper
Mm.
specific brands.
mm,
And I'm still like, I grew up in Buffalo and I'm still like learning about brands that I've never tried just in New York State. There's so many just that like people are obsessed with and that they've been eating for decades. And so I think that would be a really fun subject to do a ton of research about and also like recipes using potato chips too,
mm.
or recipes to go with potato chips.
I keep hearing about Utz. I've never had them.
You've never had Utz? Oh my gosh.
I'm a
Okay,
West Coast girl.
yeah, this is a perfect example. Like Utz are in every New York bodega. Like you can't walk 10 feet in New York without seeing some Utz. What's your potato chip brand?
Oh gosh. I want to say Lay's, but I feel like that's too boring and also not regional. I don't know if is there a regional one in California, Justine?
I don't know. I
I
just
think
know we have a lot of the kettle chips.
I was gonna say I think kettle chips
Oh.
is from California.
So speaking of cookbook writing, I have to assume there's a lot of crossover with your skill set being an editor. You mentioned you were an editor at Taste and you're currently a senior editor at Epicurious. So what is the day in the life of a senior editor at Epicurious?
Well, lately in the last few months, we have been talking about a lot of ways to make our app really exciting. We
Mm.
launched a new cooking app in the fall in November, which has like over 50,000 recipes from Bon Appetit, a lot of archival recipes from Gourmet magazine, and a lot of cool cookbook recipes too. So a lot of what I'm doing is like thinking about ways to make the app experience more exciting for people. Like, what are some categories of recipes that people really want front and
Hmm.
center today, or that sort of like fit the mood of the season that we're in?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also thinking a lot about what cooking technique and culture stories we want to publish on Epicurious, and working with a whole bunch of really awesome freelance writers to bring those stories to life.
Beautiful. What advice would you give to someone who wants to get started in food writing?
I would say pitch a lot of stories and know that there's like automatically some rejection built into that process, but don't take it personally. And keep pitching and also just like keep writing, even if it's on your own blog or your own newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Write about the things that you're passionate about.
I'm mentally taking notes. I do freelance writing, but I've never done food writing. I feel like this is my intersection of interests.
Yeah, totally.
Have you always loved food? Has this been a lifelong passion, or is this something you discovered later?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a lifelong passion. I like first got into it professionally right after college when I got an internship for Food 52. And it was like right in the early days of the company when they were a really tiny startup, like around the founder's kitchen table.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, and that was kind of like my first experience editing and running a social media account and like being on set for photo shoots and all that stuff.
Nice. So, what is next for you?
Well, I have a lot more to do with Tin to Table these next few months.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say what's next for me is getting the word out about this book and sharing my excitement for tinned fish with the world and with the audience of cookbooks. I'll be doing a few events, like a few virtual events, a few in-person events, which people can read about by going to my website, annahezel.com, and you can check out what's coming up in your city or just like in the internet.
And I can also share my love for Tin to Table. It's a beautiful book. I really encourage everyone to get it. The food photography and styling is gorgeous. The recipes are great. I loved the smoked salmon deviled eggs with the beet pickled eggs. Those were wonderful. Huge hit at the party I went to. And yeah, it's just a great book. I can't recommend it enough. While we still have you, is there anything else you would like to say about the cookbook? Any topics we haven't covered?
Yeah, I can't think of anything that we missed out on. But thank you both so much for having me. It was so fun to catch up about the book, and thank you for cooking from the book too.
Yeah, thank you for spending part of the day with us. We really appreciate it. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for speaking to our listeners. And I know you already plugged your website, but just one more time, where can folks find you online?
You can find me on Instagram at A-Hezel or on Twitter at Hezel_Anna, or my personal website, which has information about where to buy the book and upcoming events and everything, is annahezel.com.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
Go to podappetitpodcast.com for all our episodes and links to everywhere you can find us online.
Also, be sure to subscribe to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes on your favorite podcatcher.